Hello and welcome to Breaking the Cycle to Step Forward. This is episode 38. I'm Beverley Ann, and today I'm joined by
Chris Tuck. She's always joined by Chris Tuck, everybody.
I know, but in case this is somebody's first time of listening, we can't just assume. If it is your first time, welcome.
Welcome.
And if you're a regular listener, welcome again. So today's topic is really interesting, and it's a continuation because it's part 3 of parenting. And we've obviously done parts 1 and 2. And in 1, we spoke about trauma and pregnancy and the considerations, even whether or not to have children. We touched on that because that's something to consider. And we then went into parenting from younger children. So we're now going to go on and continue into older children. And we both are parents. We both have trauma behind us. And I know that quite a few people, I know I did, I'll put my hands up, it's hard to find the balance at times, Chris.
It is, especially when we know trauma responses can happen anytime. It doesn't matter how far you are on in your journey, in your recovery, or whatever words resonate with you. A trauma, a trigger will happen, and a trauma response will occur. And I'm going to give some clear examples of this throughout today's episode. But the reason why we wanted to talk about parenting again is because we touched upon, as you said, like the early years, but the struggle of being the best parent that we can be is continuous, isn't it, Beverley? We've spoken about this a lot, just me and you behind closed doors, as to what we should be doing that would be the best outcome for everybody, and where we've not felt we've handled a certain situation in the best way, what could we have done differently? And I think that the magic of our conversation and our podcast is the fact that we're not frightened of sharing our lived experiences, no matter how hard or ugly it can be sometimes, in order to shine a light and in order to share with other victims and survivors of abuse that are still dealing with trauma on a day-to-day basis, how normal a lot of this stuff is, and how we can deal with it in the best way possible. And we are the first people to hold our hands up and say, we haven't always got it right, and we are going to carry on making mistakes in the future. But it's just to give ourselves a bit of a break along the way, because there's no handout or manual for being a parent. And we have experienced the most horrific upbringings and childhoods, and we've endeavoured to not to repeat that for our children, but we don't always get it right. And that's what we want to explore in this conversation.
Absolutely, you couldn't have said it any better. And you know, when we were thinking about doing this podcast, my mind just exploded. And one of the things, as I've mentioned, I think in part 2, as my children have got older, one of the things I've said to them is, you know, as a mum, as a parent, with the knowledge that I had at that time, I've made the best decisions I can on their behalf. As a human being, if I've made any mistakes and it's impacted them, I've always said sorry. That also comes with its own challenges as well, though, because finding that courage to be vulnerable and say that, and then finding that something that you, when you say sorry, can sometimes be thrown back at you. And that, for me, is a huge trigger.
Can you give an example just to bring that point alive for our listeners?
Yeah, because one of the things I've worked really hard to be is not be a victim of my childhood. That's always been, you know, as soon as I got to 16, like you know, this is it, we're changing our childhood, and that can stay behind. And when I did have children, it's like, I don't want this coming in. And I was able to protect them for so much time of that when they were younger. It's as they become older and they become aware. Now, part of that is my own journey, because I've now opened my voice. I don't carry the shame. I don't carry the guilt, but sometimes it comes out in other ways when you're parenting. And it's the messages that are being received, not just by me, but our children as they become older, from other members of the family, and the imbalance. So if I talk about my own children, I've got 2 children. I'm not going to go into their sexes or anything in any way, because they have their right to their anonymity and their choice to share any experiences. But they're not in contact with my birth parents. So that's one set of grandparents I've kept away from them. My dad's dead anyway, and I was at an appropriate age when my children were younger, able to explain that their nanny, while she wouldn't hurt them, wasn't a nice nanny in normal ways. So my kids grew up knowing that, which meant that their other grandparents had a much stronger base, and they were fantastic and they've been very good. But then when you go through a breakup of a divorce or marriage or partnership, but separating, divorcing the other parent, and it's their family, their grandparents, it becomes, no matter how hard you try to make it communicate, there's always going to be that blood connection against you. So it was very isolating at times. And in that way, it also reinforced some of the messages that they've been hearing as they've been growing up.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, well, at one time, one of the things that were actually said, and I'm not going to say what member,
No.
but they actually said, you came from a bad childhood and you're ruining your children's life as well.
Wow. And what did they mean by that? Obviously, we know your traumatic childhood, but in what way were they saying you're ruining your children's childhood?
Because of different decisions that I was making for my own safety and changing. So, for instance, when I wanted to go to counselling, when I needed to go to counselling, I was in crisis, trying to hold it together for my children, hold the family together. And as we've said before, being that perfect parent, because I strive to be that perfect parent, you know, the white picket fence, you know, that not a toy out of place,
everything's
controlling.
Okay.
Absolutely. Never arguing in front of my children because I come from divorce, that domestic violence, my children aren't going to. So when that was crumbling, not because of anyone else's actions so much, but I was getting nightly, you know, night terrors. I wasn't coping. I was becoming very ill. So I knew then the option was to go for counselling. Well, that is very fearful for some people.
Yeah.
And it's when you're being told, when you know that you need to reach out, and I did, but then you're being told, why do you need to talk about something that happened years ago?
Yeah. I get it.
Keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
That's their messages that go through to your teenage children. Now, even if they don't witness it being said, it gets repeated in the language, which unintentionally comes through your children at times. And we know what children, you know, when our teenagers come, you know, take it away from my family for a minute.
Yeah, let's just do default, just teenage years.
Yeah,
and how
teenage years.
Teenagers
so
can...
You're in a family unit, you're growing up, and your caregivers, your parents, hopefully, are on a pedestal. They are, you know, you don't question, they provide everything that you need. However, when you become a teenager, you suddenly think, that may be your decision, that may be your belief, but that's not mine.
Yeah.
That might be how you want to do it, but I want to do it, or I want to do it a new way.
Yeah.
I mean, look at technology.
Mm.
And then suddenly that's when there were clashes. So it's normal for teenagers or young adults to go, no, I don't agree with you. It's normal to go, oh, I'm so frustrated with you. You know, I don't love you at the moment. Sometimes you really frustrate me.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Or
not
some
nice to
people might
hear.
swear.
Yeah, it's not nice to hear. And I'm not saying it's
No.
nice for anyone. But say it to someone who's come from trauma, who's experienced that as a child.
Yeah.
And I don't care where you are in recovery, there's a trigger, there's a vulnerability.
Yeah. So we've got, haven't we? We've got on one hand, sorry, I write notes as we speak.
Don't
we've
apologise.
got one hand what is normal, and I mean what is normal. So in every single household, as your children grow older, there is going to be this tussle of almost them finding their feet, challenging your barrier, not your barriers, challenging your boundaries within the household. I mean, one of these, for example, you do as you're told under my roof, yeah, and we all like hear that in every single household. We've heard it for decades, over the generations, and we've spoken about this. That frustrated the life out of me, and it did you, and it probably frustrates the life out of our children as well. But when they are coming to an age where they're trying to express themselves and exert themselves, and you've got boundaries in place and they're pushing against those boundaries, you've got those boundaries in for a reason, but they're pushing against them, they might break them, they might overstep them, then there's going to be some heat, and there's going to be some outcomes that are not necessarily going to be peaceful within the household. And I'm trying to be very PC here and delicate about this, but I don't know one household that hasn't had some kinds of conflict when their children are growing into young people and into young adults, and then they're pushing against those boundaries and they're testing out their voice and their own power within the constraints of a household where, you know, the parents are trying to do the best they can. So there might be some harsh words, some arguments, some I don't know, a bit pushing and shoving and all that kinds of stuff, you know, that is just normal in everyday life. But when you come from a background like us, where there was violence, there was domestic violence, we tried so hard, from us just sharing together and sharing in the larger world in our conversations, we tried so hard to make sure that our households, there wasn't arguing and shouting and pushing and shoving it or anything like that. There was no physical, no shouting. We tried to keep the peace. We tried to keep an even keel. And that ain't normal, but that's what we've tried to do in order to keep everyone safe and try not to recreate what we went through. But I think then the children that we've had, they've grown up not in the right sort of like normal context of what family life might look like in someone else's household. They've almost had the opposite, so that when they're faced with an argument, because it has happened, they don't know how to handle it, and we don't know how to handle it because we've almost gone the other way. And I just think this is a lot of insight and a lot of reflection going on here. And it's not always what's the word I'm looking for? It's not balanced, is it? Because we've gone the other way, and we're almost like, when something does then happen, it's a massive thing, massive thing, and it shouldn't be a massive thing. It's just normal growing up within a household.
And this is the impact of intergenerational trauma, and it's understanding that. And you know, we encourage choice. You know, what is it you'd like? You know, I know right from a child, when my children were young, I encouraged them to make decisions. What do you want? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, do you want to wear that or do you want to wear that? Make a choice.
Yeah.
But then when they get older, the lovely thing is they feel safe enough that they question it.
Yeah. And we want that, don't we? But sometimes it
do.
can be confronting and challenging.
Yeah, and they struggle to communicate. We struggle to communicate from a different angle, and also out of protection. Out of protection, you know, and sometimes crikey, if I'd known all what I know now when I had children, how differently would I have done it? I don't know. I just know that I did the best.
Yeah.
But it's easy to see both sides when we step back.
Yeah.
Now, you're not in a domestic violence relationship. So you sit from a different angle. And yes, I'm not saying you and your husband always agree.
Oh God, no. And you know, our sense of humor, we don't actually fight and bicker, but we have a lot of sarcasm in our relationship, a lot. But that's our relationship.
Yeah.
But if anyone looked in on it, they would probably go, oh my God. But to us, it's normal. It's what we do.
Yeah. And then from my point of view, I came from domestic violence. I tried to stop it. But what I became, without realising, I was a people pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, obviously making sure that I've got to be careful here of, you know, making sure that I'm keeping everybody happy in the family.
Yeah.
But not knowing my boundaries. Didn't, you know, I came last. So what I'm showing there by message is I'm not important. So I have to accept the responsibility of the message that I showed my children. Mm-hmm. And then for me, when I made the decision to end the relationship with their father, I can understand how confusing that is for them. Because no matter what the decision was about, when I said it, I thought long and hard about it, because the first thing I didn't want was my children to come from a broken home.
Yeah, I know a lot of parents think that.
Yeah. So anyone, if you're in that place at the moment, I know that feeling, you know. Yeah. And so when I made that decision, I didn't just make it on a whim. Yeah. I was 150% sure, and I stick by that, and that's what got me through the hard times. I wanted my children, regardless of their sex, to understand that there are positive ways to be in a relationship. So I made that decision. It's not always been agreed, and I understand that, and everybody has their own ways of seeing things.
Yeah, their own perspectives. Yeah,
absolutely. And even today, I stand by that decision, even though it got very, very challenging. And this is when things become uneven. But even when they're even, such in your case, Chris, what's been the hardest thing for you sometimes as a parent?
I think, and again, I've got to take responsibility for this. I've always been almost like looking at their world in a 360, constantly surveilling, almost predicting something that's going to happen and stepping in to stop it happen, to protect. And I think I've done that so much that I haven't passed on the skills of them dealing with stuff in the best way possible. So I feel that I haven't equipped them with allowing them to stand on their own 2 feet and sticking up for themselves as much as they should have done, maybe. And again, some people listening to this may be thinking, oh, well, you've just done your best. But I just think I might have gone the other way a bit too much, and I should have let them fight their own battles a little bit more, let them find their own feet a bit more, and just allow them to experience the world as it is, so that they have more of the reality of the actual world rather than what they think is the reality, because I've really made it a bit more candy floss than it is. So I feel like I've one of them in particular is finding it a lot harder at the moment because they may not have the skill set to deal with the situations that they might be finding themselves in. Does that make sense? I'm trying not to give away the situation and keep their anonymity, but talking about it from my perspective.
Absolutely. And you know, I can resonate with that, because up until the time I decided to end the marriage, I can tell you now, my children didn't actually hear any arguments.
Yeah.
You know, if the other person was getting a bit frustrated, I'd be quiet. It wasn't that I was weak, and I don't want anybody listening to this. You know, I'd say, you know, I'm not a doormat, and I wasn't a doormat, and don't underestimate my strength, but to protect my children.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted them to grow up in an environment that was safe, secure, loving, nurturing.
Yeah.
And like you, I put my hands up, because the very first time they heard an argument was, you know, a very challenging time. And it took it from an argument where mum and dad are not getting on to making it huge and traumatic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the one thing you're trying to prevent
happens.
You've created. Now, anyone listening, I don't want you feeling like, oh my God, what have I done? And this is why we're being honest here.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard to be honest and not have judgment, because there's a lot of people that make judgment. And I have been for many, many years, nearly 20 years, judged against. And I'm not going to go too much into that, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And I can see how some people haven't understood.
Yeah. Yeah. But we're also sort of like, we're trying to say, aren't we, that we don't get it right all the time, because we are human. And at the end of the day, what is the best way to deal with things when they don't go according to plan, when you do feel like there's a situation that's got out of hand? How do you actually then fix it? How do you deal with it without picking up the pieces and trying to make everything all rosy, putting that mask on and how can we all grow and evolve, and how can we all be better for it? How can we all learn from the experience? And for me, I know you've probably got a lot to say on this, but for me, on reflection, it's happened, the situation's happened. I've reflected on my part on it. I've offered the apologies, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. And now I'm stepping back, and I'm just allowing time to allow the situation to unfold, and for that other person to have the space and move along with what is going on with their feelings, allowing them to process it like I have. And then hopefully we can have a conversation about it, a week, a month, whatever is needed, to actually to talk it through, talk it out, and put it to bed. Because as I was growing up, I never had any of that. So I didn't know the process. I didn't know the feelings. I didn't know how to deal with stuff. But I think the best thing that I've given my children is the ability or the space for them to say what they want, how they want, no matter how upsetting it is, so that then we can say how we feel, say how we've upset each other, and then, you know what, go away, process, come back, let's talk it through, and then let's put it to bed. So I think I've allowed that to happen, even though it's uncomfortable, even though sometimes the feelings make you feel like the worst person ever. But I think that communication has not been there because we've gone too far the other way. And now what we're trying to do as a group of adults within our lives is bring that balance and bring that new communication style into practice. And it's hard, Bev.
me about it. And anyone listening, I bet it isn't just a one conversation, quick fix. It's
No.
so not. And I put my hands up, and I'm going to share some of the things that have been, I've been called, all you ever do is try and fix it. When I'm talking to you, don't try and fix it. Stop trying to put another positive spin on it. I don't want to hear that. Or you're cold, you're heartless, or that's not true what you're saying. And it is actually true, but you're not telling me I am. But, and I put my hands up to this, there's a lot of stuff that I haven't said, not because I've lied, because I've tried to protect.
Yeah.
So now, with my children at a different age to yours, I've had to learn to what I call sit on my hands. And I've actually stepped back for two reasons. The first one is I'm always going to be their mum. That doesn't change. But I need to be able to let them go with love, go and live your life. Go and experience those things that I don't want you to experience. Yeah. And it's not my fault when that happens, although God is the last thing I want, especially, some things come out, but it's not but I'm here. However, at the same time that I'm here, I also, even though I'm your mum, I am a person too.
Yeah.
And this is where I changed. And I accept that I moved it because I went from being mum, who put herself last, and I know that happens, to actually when my children get older saying, no, I need to think about my boundaries and learn about them and learn about how to keep myself safe. And that was in my recovery. You just see my head go funny. You need to talk. My battery is going low, and I've got to plug it in.
All right, I'll keep the show on the road, don't worry. So just carrying on with the conversation around parenting and how do we respond to our more adult children in our lives and work out where we sit with the relationship whilst we're working through our own trauma is very difficult at times. But I think if we want them to know what a healthy relationship looks like and what healthy communication looks like, and you are allowed to express your anger, your frustration, your upset, your happiness, your sadness, for you to be able to express all of that as a person. Some of us need to be taught how to do that because we don't know how to do that. And that's part of all of the learning and the journey as well, from recovery, from what we've gone through. And sometimes it has been said to me that because my childhood has been so traumatic and so abusive, that I can't recognize smaller or lesser incidences of what may be termed abuse. And from my perspective, what was explained to me, I don't see as abuse. I just don't, because of my experience and my perspective. But that's not to say that the person who spoke to me about stuff hasn't had a response themselves to something that's happened to them. And I can fully acknowledge that, and I can tune into that. I can empathize with that, sympathize with that, apologize for whatever. But it's not going to change what my reality is and what my perspective is. And sometimes, as the adult with more years of being on this earth and with more wisdom, and I'm talking to all adults out there that might be sitting in the same place as us, we do need to just let those people in our lives say what they want, but then put some context and some perspective around where they're coming from. Because I don't think, in my experiences, that sometimes it's said within the right context, and I think that they need to know that. And I don't think there's anything wrong in saying that either.
Absolutely.
Not liked.
Absolutely. And one of the things, And I say what I've had to learn is I don't know. So going from, mum who something is, oh, well, this is the answer, this is what you do, I've had to step back and go, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And that's hard. But I also went to parenting classes as well.
Yeah.
As I've said before.
Yeah.
And I needed that. I needed that for me as a person, as a parent, because I was fearful of that message. You've come from a bad background.
Yeah.
But, you're going to ruin your children's lives.
Yeah.
And I was like, no way am I. Absolutely no way. Absolutely not. And I'm pleased. And it's like now understanding what our triggers are, understanding who we are, knowing our boundaries does help us in the long term, because it's helped us to be able to now be reflective. I'm always looking back. Is there anything I could have done differently? Okay. And I really check in and I really try to look at both sides. And now I've taken the decision, okay, you can step back, but it wasn't an easy, and I'm not saying it's easy to anyone who's listening, but we also need to allow our children that space, because then when we have the conversations, then they can go, oh, okay. And that's when we can be vulnerable, because it's not easy, especially if we feel we're being attacked. I know my response. You want to attack me? Thank you very much. No, I'm taking myself away.
Yeah.
And I will take myself away, but that can be seen as you're not listening.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's take our family out of this just for a moment. I've been reading lately that there has been a massive increase on children and young people literally attacking their parents, like physically and all things like this. And of course, that is not right. But a lot of people's responses to that was, oh, well, it's because we're not allowed to discipline. It's because we're not allowed to smack. It's because we're not allowed to do this and that. And then when you go on to these kinds of videos and whatever conversations, and you say, well, actually, there's laws against adults hitting each other, yet there's no laws yet properly passed in the UK that stops adults hitting children. And for me, and we've discussed this before, if we show children, like if they step out of line, if they say something that we don't want to hear and we're going to hit them, we are showing them, surely we are showing them that when they don't agree with something, that they hit. So we need to break that cycle, and we've tried that. We've broken that cycle because we haven't allowed it to happen. However, that doesn't stop situations where there might be blow-ups in arguments within the family because of these boundaries that we put in place that, you know, young people no longer agree with, or they've got their own beliefs about. You know, so what is the best way of dealing with these kind of situations when they do blow up in every single household? Absolutely. Well, when they do blow up, it's, you know, as I said, and I have been there, if something blows up and there's a fear for your safety in any way, yeah, I'm taking myself away. I'll come back. You go to your room. I mean, they say that you shouldn't send your children to their rooms, but you know what? There's a time and a place. And I'd rather send my children to a place of safety for them to be able to reflect, and me to my room, to my place of safety to reflect and have that space to take away some of that emotion. If they don't want to go there, I'll be honest, I've actually been in my bedroom and locked the door. Yeah. Because this is important. Now, some people listening may say that's not conducive. Well, at that time, it was a lot better than it becoming physical. Yeah. I'm going to say at times, you know, when they won't stop, I was like, oh, what do I do? Yeah. And smacking wasn't something I like doing at all. So that's one way. Another way is asking yourself, what support do you need yourself? Where are you? Because if we're in hyper
hyper alert stage, and we're being triggered, fight and flight, and we're being triggered because we've got a teenager in front of us who can't vocalize, and so they're using violence. I'm not making excuses, but that's where the behavior comes from. It's something that they want to verbalize and they can't. So
they're angry, in an angry state themselves, potentially.
That's not conducive for anyone. But it is important then you find support for yourself, parenting classes, wellness, finding your tools. You offer a workshop for people to understand where they are. There's lots of different people around. Find that support, because standing up all the time and being face to face is not the conducive way. You need to have that space to come out, but being able to then sit down, or if you can't speak to each other, write it.
And I'm gonna own up here, for me and my hubby, sometimes communication can be really difficult, just because of the way that I was brought up, and sometimes I just feel like I can't say it because I don't want to hurt anybody, but it needs to be said. But I really don't want to hurt anybody. So the best way for me, because it brings up a lot of stuff for me, I WhatsApp him and I just like, oh, that's gone, good. And then he'll WhatsApp back, and it's almost like the emotion's been taken out of the conversation, and you can actually get to the core of the issue without the emotions being thrown all over the place. So we've actually found that when we are both in a place of disagreement, that if one of us talks, because we've been together like nearly 40 years, for God's sake, but if one of us sort of like doesn't agree with the other, and we've got emotion going on and we can't get to a place of agreement, what's that? Because then we can just go like, right, you know what, you've really upset me because and then he'll come back and say whatever, and we get through it that way. So we've just found, even though they always say, don't they, communicate face to face and sometimes it's just not possible.
No, and that's one thing I encouraged my children to do, even at an early age. And we talked about choice in another podcast, but I encouraged them to write down, write a letter, even if you don't send it. And this is the ironic thing. I find it really challenging writing down. I do. I've spoken about this. I'd rather do verbal. However, there are times that I've written letters. Now, for me to write a letter to somebody, no matter what's in it, even when it's being sent with love and it's being honest, is a huge gift to me. But that doesn't mean to say that the person receiving it is receiving it in the same light. So like WhatsApp, for some people that would be explosive. So we're not telling people do this and this is the result you're going to get.
Work it out for yourself and your relationship.
And the other way as well is when you don't say anything as a people pleaser, like you say, inside you come down and the kitchen, look at the mess of the kitchen. That's what you feel, but you don't say it. Whereas I've learned also a lot, and I'm happy to share this, from my friends, watching them, being in that comfortable position, being in the house when they start shouting and you think, oh God, what's going to happen? And actually it doesn't. Nothing happens. That's my own experience.
Our upbringing, though, isn't it? And this is what is normal for one household is not normal for another. And this is what I was trying to sort of like share about, putting things into context. When you've lived this hell, then you've created this almost like calm, peaceful oasis, or perceived oasis, that we've both talked about. And then something happens, and then everybody around you goes, oh my God, what's going on? Because you've not brought balance into the household. It's almost gone the other way, and then you've got the consequences of that.
And that's the hardest thing, and we need to be really honest here. There is no perfect family.
No, absolutely not.
There is no perfect home. What I do see a lot of, and I really don't like it, I see a lot of judgment, especially around parenting, and we need to back off from other parents making judgments. We can share, this is my experience, or have you thought of this?
Yeah.
But also for our children. I have great compassion for our children, because I can't imagine what it's been like for them being born into, we've tried to give them a life that's completely different,
Yeah.
and there's no understanding or comprehension of where we're coming from. And yet what we're trying to do is protect them. I don't want to share all my experiences with my children. Doesn't matter how old they are. If they want to ask questions, I'll answer, but they'll never know the true extent, because I wouldn't want to share that, put that responsibility on, no matter how old they get, because they're still my babies.
Yeah, I understand. Unfortunately, I wrote about mine, and so my daughter picked the book up and read about it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and one day I'll read a book, but I look at it as it's choice.
Yeah.
It's choice.
Oh, this is a mind-blowing topic, isn't it? Parenting. But I also, as well, wanted to put something into context. We spoke about this the other day when I was trying to figure out my head. Through the decades or generations, certain things used to be okay, but they're not okay today. Yeah. And one of those things that has followed us all through from the decades is you can't leave the table until you've finished your dinner, for example. That happens in all households, to my knowledge. I don't know not one household over time that hasn't had that messaging in. Now, whether it's right or wrong is completely a different topic of conversation, okay? But I've said it to my children. I had it said to me. But for me, when my kids were growing up, for example, I always endeavoured to give them good food, a variety of food, and it was cooked with love, and it was never big plates of food, and it was never disgusting stuff like I was served up. Again, my perception, my perspective. And I would encourage them to sit there and eat it, but I would never say finish your plate. I would just say, if you don't eat it, there's nothing else later.
Yeah.
Or it will be there for when you're hungry later. So that's sort of like how I changed the messaging. But if your partner has a different way of bringing the children up to you, and when you're at work, they then say, right, you're not leaving the table till you've eaten all your dinner, the children can take that on as obviously different messaging, but also as a trauma if they're made to sit up the table. But for many people, that's just a normal thing. Whereas when I was young, in the abusive house, I was told, like, I couldn't get down to the table until I ate it in one household, but in another household, I was told, you've got 5 minutes to eat as much as you can, and then that's it, it's being taken away. So there's a lot of harmful stuff that can go on that can live with you throughout your lifetime. But in a normal household back in the 60s, 70s, eating all your food or there's nothing else was actually a normal like narrative. There was nothing wrong in that. But now it's seen as a almost a precursor, some of that messaging, a precursor to some eating disorders.
And that's, for me, being able to sit around a table was a privilege. And in my children's home, we were taught table manners as if we were sitting up at the Queen's table, and they said that will take you across the world. So that was what was lovely. I was taught that, so I taught that to my children. And as if there was bad manners at the table, it wasn't that talk, because we always do best and worst and things like that. It's a social environment. So if you don't want to if you're misbehaving, if you're not eating your dinner and that's fine. This is a privilege to be invited to the table. If you don't want to join us, that's your choice. Get down from the table and you can eat later on your own. But again, that's seen as, potentially, it's been seen as exclusion. But in my words, and my objective is to say, actually, you're not you're not excluded, but these are the boundaries.
Yeah.
This is social. I'm trying to teach you a gift that I was given that has taken me through. You know, I've experienced some wonderful tables to be at, and I'm eternally grateful. And this is when we're talking about perspectives, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's how it's received.
But what you try to, not you, us collectively,
in general,
what we've tried to do is the best that we can, but there might be a trauma response for our children because of the way that they interpret things, and that's,
and
you just have to
real.
accept it, and it's very
and
real
it's
for
hard.
them, and it's hard to actually hear it when all you did was from the best place, but it's not been received like that. And
Absolutely.
I think, I know that's just an example, but there'll be other examples out there that maybe parents that are listening can tap into and actually go, oh, actually, maybe when my child or my adult child comes up to me and says, actually, mum, dad, that wasn't conducive for me, and I've actually got a trauma from that. What do we do? The only thing we can do is just say we did it from a place of what we've learned, what was passed on to us. Was it right? Was it wrong? Well, that's all we knew at the time, and that was from the best place. It came from the best place from us. But I'm really sorry that it has had a negative impact for you. And just to acknowledge it and to apologize, because that's all we can do. We can't go back and change the past.
No, and the ironic thing is as well is there are memories that I have, you know, when things were really struggling, and I have a particular memory and it was one of my children's birthday, and they got this present, and their dad wasn't available to help, and I thought, you know, when they opened it, that would be all lovely. Do you see what I mean? And it wasn't, and I didn't have the knowledge how to put it together, and I'm trying to put it together. So now I'm in a place where this is my child's birthday, and it's not as wonderful as I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
They're looking to me to get it all ready and get it working so that they can use it. And of course, now I'm in survival mode. You know, my brain, something that I could do normally, but I feel under pressure. I want to make it the best I can for my child.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not, and I'm feeling as a people pleaser back then, like, this is my fault. I'm failing. I'm failing as a person. I'm failing as a mum. I'm letting my child down. It's their birthday. It was all, and I remember just losing it.
Yeah.
Losing it.
Yeah.
And just screaming, stop it, you know, and shouting out and going to bed. What's ironic is that guilt sat with me for years.
Yeah.
And in a conversation, when we talk about childhood, because obviously they're very good at saying different things, that wasn't remembered.
But it was for you.
But then there's other things, as you say, that are unintentional that get remembered. So one of the things I have said to my children, but I meant it in a good way, years ago, was when one of my children said, when I have children, I'm never going to tell them off.
Okay, good luck with that one.
And I said, you know what? I said, the hardest thing about being a parent is the guilt that comes because you suddenly realise that you're responsible for how they feel, like the outcomes.
Yeah.
And you have to get used to that yourself, and that's the hardest thing.
Yeah.
And I said it without even a lot of consideration at the time, but this is what we're talking about now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Accepting that responsibility, even when it wasn't intentional.
And I think another thing, Bev, that came up for my family is that Dad was always working because of his job.
Yeah.
I was working as well because of my trauma background and roof over the head, money in the bank, stability, security, that. We were always striving to always work. So we would have all of that coming in. But the children have been impacted because of that. The amount of Christmases that Dad hasn't been around, the birthdays he hasn't been around for, just everyday family life. It was always mum that was around most of the time. And it's actually come back to roost that, well, dad doesn't love me, dad doesn't care for me, dad doesn't this, dad doesn't that, because he was never there. And I'm like, but dad was at work working really hard to give us the money so that you could have the life that you had. And I think that's an echo chamber across many households where there's been this imbalance of just one parent being the main carer for the children. And also in my house, where I've tried to protect the children to an nth degree, I always did everything when it came to their personal care. I actually pushed my husband away. Pushed him away. I said, no, I'm doing this, don't worry. So I've actually got my part to play in this, where for all best intentions, I created that void between them and their dads. And so, dad's said, but what do you mean? Of course I love them, of course I care for them. Don't the fact that I go out to work and earn the money show that? But the children don't feel that. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to happen around that in itself. There needs to be a bit of understanding from the grown-up child's perspective, from their perspective, that actually I can recognize now that he did try his best by doing what he wanted to do, but at the same time I need more emotional input from you, please.
And this is the transition, isn't it? This is that horrible transition. It's being comfortable in the uncomfortable. And that's really what we're saying.
It's horrible.
It is. So we're coming up, time-wise.
Oh, always.
So, I know, because we could carry on talking. And I think that sitting in the uncomfortable is really true. And I will say my husband now is really good at that. Really, really good.
Good at what? Sitting with the uncomfortable.
And voicing what he's thinking.
And what does that do for you?
It's actually really helped me. Okay. I'm not saying we never argue. But we both come from a background of recovery in different ways. So we both have been able to look inwards. And when you're both coming at that space,
it's easier, isn't it?
So much different, because we can recognise when we need time out.
Yeah.
We can explode, but we can recognise it, and we can go away, or we can both self-reflect, and we can both come back and say, look, this was my intention.
Yeah, and
I'm sorry.
Exactly. Instead of batting heads all the time.
But the sorry doesn't mean to say, not from a point of it's not victim based. It's having that courage, that strength to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
When you can't always be vulnerable. So last thoughts from your point, Chris. What would you say to anyone who's been listening to this now and thinks, oh my God, I've got a young child sitting here. How do I know what to do going forward?
You know what? I was listening to Gabor Mate again the other day, and when he was talking about his relationships with his kids and what he would have done differently, I was a bit gobsmacked when he was talking about the realities of being a father and growing up with trauma and then having children and the things that went on in his household. I actually thought, oh, someone's actually like talking about what actually has gone on in my household as well. And you know what? Thank you, because it's normalized it a little bit and taken a bit of the angst away for me. But one of the things he said was, if you have gone through an abusive childhood, adulthood, before you have children, try and recognize the impact on yourself and get your shit sorted. So
absolutely.
You don't pass it on in any way.
No. And
to the next generation.
I've got my shit sorted because I had children and I didn't want to pass it on. And as I've said, if I knew now, back then, so I absolutely, if you've already got children, it's still not too late.
No, of course it's not. We're not saying that, but
we're
just saying the journey's harder.
And that's what I admire in young people these days, is that they have access to it, you know, and they have access in different ways. But
Yeah.
we're having these conversations,
Yeah.
and it's brilliant because we're not trying to shut our children up. That's what we don't want
But
to
we
do.
don't want, no.
We don't want, we want them to engage with us. We might not like it. I'm not saying
No,
that
it's not easy being told about your failings. Not easy at all.
No. However, we do want that because that is the basis of communication.
And we're showing them how to express how they're feeling. So
Yeah.
why would we want to shut them up? We don't, but we don't always like what we hear.
No, and we also have our own boundaries for safety. So there is a way to communicate. So one of the things I used to say was, go away to your room, think about it, and when you're ready, we'll sit down and have a conversation.
Yeah, and if then that conversation gets heated, break away again and then come back to it. Yeah. Because when you're in fight and flight and you're like, rah, 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 and they're doing the same, rah, 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 all it can do is go bang.
Yeah. So one last thing, a funny thing I'm going to share. My children, as they all do as they get older, they suddenly share all these different things when they were naughty and they got away with it, etc. But they shared when I most scared them. And I said, Mum, when you were angry and shouting and going, oh, we knew that was nothing. It was when you spoke quietly, slowly.
Yeah.
Because you didn't actually have to shout. And if you said you were going to do something, you always did it.
Yeah.
And if that was bad language, open their mouth, then yes, I did that. I did that. Wasn't having that.
Yeah.
So, and I put my hands up to that. So, yeah.
So parenthood, guys, there's no manual. There's no perfect parent. There's no perfect household. And the best thing you can do is communicate, express boundaries, and talk more and more. And then if you can't come to an agreement, a resolution, you agree to disagree, but you all move on.
Yeah. And it's okay to have that space.
Yeah.
It's okay. Your relationship doesn't change. You're still going to be father, mother, daughter, son, you know, whatever. But do it with love. Have that space with love.
Yeah. Right. We have got to stop.
We do. Anyway.
We'll probably do a parenting part 4 sometime, guys. But at the moment, parenting part 3, done and dusted. Well done, Bev.
As always, anyone with questions or anyone with some feedback, you can email BreakingTheCycleToStepForward @gmail.com. You can find information on Chris as well through Survivors of Abuse. You can find information of me through stepforwardpractice.co.uk, and we are available on YouTube, on podcast, and Mintwave Radio, which is good. So goodbye for now, and see you in the next one.
Bye.